back on the show today, Mr. Steven Kotler. So Steven, I guess, is associated with flow states, done many things as a journalist and as a writer, New York Times best-selling author. So, he's kind of one of the bigger deal people we have on. Talked to him before, part of the conference and elsewhere. Very learned man. I've listened to several of his books on ebooks. There's something called the Flow Collective. So out there in the real world, working with, all kinds of interesting people as well. Always got something interesting to say. So Steven, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess it's been at least a year since I've talked to you last. What's been going on in your kind of flow studies since then?
Three things have been at the center of our work over the past year. The first is we've been really looking at sort of the emerging field of peak performance aging. The idea that we can kick ass till we kick the bucket, which is about 10 different fields that sort of came together and are starting to coalesce right now. So we've been running experiments in peak performance aging. I've got a book coming out next February on the topic. We've been doing that. We've been studying, and by the way, the obscene sound in the background is my dog drinking water. He's very big. It sounds like we're on a porn set. That's not actually what's happening. I'm just wanted to mention
wasn't
that.
going there, but it is now. It is now.
I mean, you brought bongos and skeletons to the party, so I thought I'd bring sound effects.
Yeah, for those of you on YouTube, my Wi-Fi went down, so I run across the park to my good friend Gary Carter's house. Gary Carter, shout out. He's an anatomist. So on YouTube, people can probably see sort of skeletons and plasticized body parts and things in the background from Gary's study. So thanks for Gary to lend me his Wi-Fi.
Either that, Mark, or this is your serial killer in training room.
This is my cave. This is my serial killer cave. There's bits of, yeah. So aging, definitely.
Aging. We've been really, the really, I don't know if it's the really, because they're all exciting to me. We spent, at the end result of like 3 years, but it'll come out hopefully if the reviewers like it in the next 6 months. But we spent the past 3 years, fancy terms, trying to understand the neural dynamics of flow, more prosaically, what happens in the brain really at a network level during the first 2 seconds of flow. So as you drop into a flow state, that transition, what's going on in the brain? And flow is really closely related to PTSD, right? There's post-traumatic growth, there's post-traumatic stress disorder, and very similar experiences can lead, one way they go to flow and one way they go to PTSD. And we wanted to know what's the difference? Why is that? What's happening? So we spent a long time looking at that. And I think we got really far, got to work with some just phenomenal brains in neuroscience along the way. That was really cool. And we've also been working 3 to 4 years on the relationship between flow and the endocannabinoid system. So flow and THC and marijuana, flow and CBD, and how the internal endocannabinoid system, right, which is what gets active if you smoke pot or take CBD. But it's like a second immune system, right? And it's a stress response system. And we've been studying that as well. So those are the things we've been thinking long and hard about flow-wise for the past 2 to 3 years, and starting to work on a giant project in flow and intuition. So that's next.
Yeah, that'll keep us busy for the next 5 hours. Well, having recently been in Amsterdam and Ukraine, I feel like, there's definitely some topics here. Just for those who may have missed previous episodes, what is flow? Quick definition to set us up.
Flow it's technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness, one where we feel our best and perform our best. It's any of those moments where you get so focused on what you're doing that everything else just seems to disappear. And throughout all aspects of mental and physical performance tend to significantly skyrocket. And flow is ubiquitous. It shows up in all humans, so it's available to all of us. It's how evolution hardwired humans for peak performance. So that's the quick and dirty.
Bam, lots in there. Aging. So I think I've gone to sort of have little complaints and aches and pains and things looked at more in the last 2 years than I did in the last 20 years. I'm 42. I'm starting to notice age as a thing. I'm in the gym and I'm going, am I going to be able to lift more weight than this ever again? Is this my peak? Am I getting injured?
Mark, let me just halt you here and tell you that I'm 55. I'm coming back from a broken back and I just beat my max squat.
Okay.
4 days ago. literally just beat my max squat. So there's hope. But the pains don't really go away. We could talk more about all
stuff does
all
change though, right, with age. Because sometimes I hear this sort of optimistic American, there's no such thing as aging, which is clearly bullshit. But then at the other end of the bullshit spectrum is aging is just deterioration and we're all doomed.
Yeah. So I mean, the old theory, and it's old. I mean, it like early 20th century to now is what I call the long, slow rot theory, right? It's an inevitable decline. It starts in our mid-20s and everything drops off a cliff. The new version is everything we thought dropped off a cliff. It will if you don't do anything, for sure. But we now know they're all use it or lose it skills. This isn't to say, so it's tricky because do muscle fibers decline over time? Yes. Do strength fibers decline over time? Yes. By the time you're 80, you're going to have lost about 30%. But there's a whole bunch that remains, and the remaining fibers do double the work. So they can more than compensate. It's not to say that at 80, you're going to be able to perform like you performed at 20, but if you train right, I'll give you another one, VO max, right? Intense aerobic capacity. It starts declining at 25, more significantly at 35, and just drops off a cliff. And they thought that was a death sentence. And what we now know is if you train with high bursts of intense activity, right, high intensity training regularly, we've got 80-year-old octogenarian endurance athletes who are, that was redundant, but we got 80-year-old endurance athletes with the VO max of 35-year-olds and measured, well documented, lots of studies. So, and this goes on and on and on. We're understanding how to fight back against cognitive decline. And then there's the whole, and this isn't really where I work, but I've written books about it because of the half of my life that works on disruptive technology. My central focus is how do you use technology to solve environmental challenges. But my partner, Peter Diamandis, is very focused on how do you use disruptive technology to solve health and longevity challenges. And Peter, just wrote a great book called Lifespan with Tony Robbins on some of these ideas. But the point is that both longevity technology and regenerative medicine are advancing really quickly, right? Every day you're alive, you gain 11, 12 hours of life expectancy now because of how fast biotech is moving. And so that stuff is really exciting. All that stuff means to me is, oh, cool, there's more shit to fix me when I break myself and I get to live longer and be healthier along the way. Cool. Okay, now what do I do? And most of what you do is cognitive. And it's interesting, I want to just sort of start where you started, which is sort of the American view on aging, that it's not that aging is all in your mind, but it's shockingly in your mind. So there's 25 years of mindset, starting with Ellen Langer at Harvard, sort of the godmother of peak performance aging, pioneer of successful aging, pioneer of positive psychology, just a brilliant woman. She really helped lay the path for this, but this is well established. Positive mindset towards aging, meaning I'm really excited what's going to happen in the second half of my life, produces an extra 7.5 years of life. And we understand the physiological stuff now, and it's very significant. And her studies are really funny about like the mind-body connection, but proved over and over and over again. And then they did this, suddenly everybody was like, okay, but is this real? Is it not? So they did the Ohio study of longitudinal study of aging and retirement, 20 years. They test people all the time for what's your mindset towards aging. By the end of it, positive mindset towards aging is 7.5 extra years of life. So you can smoke cigarettes and have a positive mindset towards aging and live longer than somebody who is pessimistic about it and doesn't smoke, which is kind of crazy.
I'm blown. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's when most people start digging it up. If you want time for one more, because it's just weird and funny. Ellen Langer is a really funny woman, and she ran some really funny studies. So in 1981, she takes 16 80-year-old guys from Harvard, where she's teaching, to a monastery 2 hours away in Massachusetts. Monastery has been converted to look exactly like 1961. Exactly. Everything, the furniture is the same. Everything's the same. It looks 20 years earlier. It's like she drops these 16 guys off in 1961. They get divided in half. Half the group just reminisce about what you did in 1961 and hang out and relax for 5 days. Chill. The other half, act like it's 1961. Talk about the news in 1961, meaning like the Russians are advancing into Cuba and, blah, blah, and Khrushchev and all the stuff that Americans were worried about in 1961, all that stuff. All the books are from 1961. They see movies from 1961. They pretend 5 days later, they measure everything, by the way, everything you possibly imagine. 5 days later, the group that pretended it was 1961, the amount of things that changed are just silly. Blood pressure dropped, their gait changed, their arthritis went away so much that they got taller and their fingers got longer. In photographs taken pre and post, outsiders thought the post photographs were 20 years earlier, and on and on and on and on. All these physiological. It was the first time it was the first major time anybody had gone, okay, this mindset thing let's test it. Let's see what happens. And this study has been, it was so crazy that nobody believed her. So they repeated it 2 more times as TV shows. So you can, there's a TV show.
Like a fun study. Like that's something to do for a good time, right? Let's pretend it's the 60s.
True that. Anyways, so mindset, aging, peak performance, interesting stuff.
What about flow states then? I mean, I guess my experience is I've had more flow states as I got a bit older because experience is developing, and that's part of this, competence and relaxation, just being more relaxed in different activities. Like, is there a sort of U curve of flow states in relation to age generally, or?
That is, it is what we do know is from, there's a deep literature on aging and adult development. Or flow in adult development, excuse me, because Csikszentmihalyi, godfather of flow psychology himself, was very interested in the topic and wrote one textbook and a couple other books that are sort of in and around the subject of human development and flow. And we do know that for a bunch of different reasons, you're flow prone in early childhood. You become sort of unflow prone more and more by your teenage years, right? And it drops, and it seems the more the amygdala, the fear system gets quieter, which happens as we age, right? We get less afraid about certain things. Risk, we become more risk phobic, but we calm down about a lot of stuff. The amygdala becomes less reactive. That helps. Loss of like the ability to not, like, being able to set down shame and self-consciousness and fail in public, and like all this stuff that was at least for me, impossible as like a teenager, couldn't do to save my life. And even as an adult, like it was always really hard for me to be bad at something in public. I still don't like it, but now like I can push through it and still learn in that situation where before it would kind of cripple me. Things like that start to change. Anyways, you definitely become more flow prone over time. We wanted to know, so flow massively increases learning and memory. As you probably remember from the last time we talked, flow dumps a bunch of neurochemistry into the brain. The bigger the hit of neurochemicals, the better chance the brain will go, this is important, let's move it from long-term or short-term storage into long-term memory. And that's sort of one of the things that these neurochemicals that show up in flow and feel so good do, is they tag experiences as like important, save for later. So, in the US Defense Department did studies of soldiers in flow. They were finding they learned 240% faster than normal. So we took that idea out of flow science, and we took a bunch of stuff out of embodied cognition. Really sort of many of the ideas that were present in like the inner game of tennis or the inner game of golf or inner game of skiing from a long time ago, and sort of updated them and really looked at them using what we now know about embodied cognition, and put those together to see, can you teach an old dog new tricks? And there's all kinds of really cool stuff here. So there's a guy named Gene Cohn who's he's really the pioneer of peak performance aging. He ran the National Institute on Aging. He founded it. He pioneer of gerontology psychiatry, a bunch of other stuff. He made some enormous contributions to the field, including figuring out that old dogs are actually better at learning certain kinds of tricks than young dogs. Our brains start to change in our late 40s and our 50s in good ways. Like there's stuff that goes wrong, but there's a lot of stuff that goes good. And you actually get access to some cognitive superpowers if you do it right. But you get new levels of intelligence and wisdom and creativity and empathy. And these, if done right, are fantastic for learning. And so you gain access to, when I say intelligence, it's 3 different kinds of thinking skill sets that are much harder before, and they come online in our 50s because the brain changes and our genetics start to change a little. So you can actually learn better, right? And learning, pushing things up the challenge skills sweet spot, like I'm pushing a little harder, that's a flow trigger. So our ability to learn better as we age seems to help this along too. So it's exciting. And we used it at the Flow Research Collective to do some fun studies, and in peak performance aging, and teaching a bunch of old dogs new tricks and things like that. So we've had some fun with it.
Nice. Sometimes I wonder if any of the aging researchers are under 25 though. I think they get a different set of data for it.
It's interesting. So my partner, my company is who in the peak performance division, the guy who's running it is 34. And one of the reasons he's involved is there's a lot of data that basically says, like, you can rock till you drop, but you got to start to train long before you start to wane, right? Pardon the rhyming pun there, right? But like, I can't think of any other way to say that. Sorry. But it's really true. Like, there's some diet stuff that if you can start in on it in your 20s, it really matters. We know to really unlock these sort of cognitive superpowers, you have to solve the puzzle of identity by age 30. It's sort of a gateway into adult development. At 40, it's match quality, which means you need a match between what you do for a living and your strengths and your beliefs and who you are, passion, purpose, all that stuff. And by 50, you got to forgive those people who have done you wrong and sort of let go of that shit. Otherwise, it just wrecks. Not only does you don't get access to your superpowers, all the cognitive stuff I was talking about, but there's pretty clear evidence, pretty big studies that say you're just going to hate the second half of your life, man, if you don't do these things, right? Like, well-being just falls off a cliff if you don't successfully do these things. So it's neat, and it tells us the research is sort of telling us more sort of psychologically about how we should actually live our life, like how our biology is designed for us to live, and like what challenges we need to sort of solve by when, to really kind of be able to maximize our potential. So I think that stuff is neat.
Yeah, and I kind of imagine a world where there are different developmental challenges at different ages, almost problems that need solving. And we kind of get that for kids, right? But then it's sort of 18 or 20 or whatever it is. And then it's sort of, that's it. Like,
so Mark, you have just inadvertently laid out. No, you've inadvertently laid out, like, so there's like 100 years of versions of what you just said. So the Erik Erikson, Piaget said, yeah, children develop through challenges, right? Erik Erikson came along and said, no, children and adults develop through these, what he called psychosocial challenges, right? Like, the most famous one is identity, right? Like, do you assume a role or do you develop an individual identity? And that's a tension that shows up around 13 and defines us, right? And so forth. Then a woman named, a brilliant researcher, Bernice Neugarten, came along, and she said, hey, you know what, that's all that stuff is true, but like, we got social clocks. Like, you got pressure. This is the right time to have a family. This is the right time to go to school. This is the right time to get a job. This is the time to get, right? And she says we develop by being on schedule and making certain decisions, or off schedule, which brings about a bunch of pressure and a bunch of different decisions. That's right. So what I like most is what happens to adult development once you start introducing flow into the discussion. And this was where one of the greatest contributions made by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He figured out that all these things are true. Like, everything everybody, like I've just sort of laid out, those are all true. Like, the world impacts how we grow up, and our genetics impact how we grow up, and all these things are true. But we actually have an inner system for growing up. And I don't mean growing up in a maturation sense or in a body, I mean like an internal, how we become adults. And it's driven by flow. Flow functions like a sort of foundational drive in that it forces us to push on our skills, right? Slightly harder, expand a little bit, get a little better, walk the path to mastery, a couple more steps. Oh, we drop into flow. Flow is this incredibly exhilarating, powerful, the most powerful, positive, exciting, addictive feeling we get on earth. And we want more of it. But the next time to get more of it, you got to push your skills a little farther. And as you do this, you develop as a person, you get more complex and more complex and more complex and more complex. And this is actually the mechanism for adult development. This is sort of how we gain wisdom and complexity as an individual. And it's a cycle that's driven, genetics are involved. Obviously, the environment, culture, all that stuff is involved, but it's a cycle that's driven forward by flow.
So kind of want to take a left turn. On the way here, I was thinking, I want to talk about this. This is great. But then I was also thinking, what feels off with flow for me right now? And it's sort of, since last we talked, the world's gone to shit in a bunch of ways. And the idea of sort of peak states, like most of the people I know are struggling with financial issues. A lot of friends in Ukraine, so very, closely connected to the situation there. Health-related stuff's been an issue through the time we've known each other. The COVID and the next step from this, political crisis, fuel, whatever's next. Somehow it starts to seem a bit like a kind of luxury, like looking at peak states when most of the people I know are just trying to fucking survive.
So peak is a tricky word there, because that's you raise a fair point, so right, like all those things are true and you raise a fair point, sir. So one thing that you should know is flow isn't about happiness. Access to flow will over time make you happier. It will actually impact day-to-day experience, but it's really most of the time when we're in flow, our emotions are turned off. It's neutral. We're not happy or sad. And usually we're using our skills to the utmost, but you're actually often in pain and pushing and things like that. But like early studies of flow, in fact, this book, Optimal Performance, Chick Set Me High and Chick Set Me High, Mike and his wife, Isabella, wrote it together, and it's filled with stuff like this. Flow in concentration camps, flow on the assembly line, flow in difficult survival situations. Like this is the tool that evolution designed for us to survive those situations. But let me put it in a totally different term. Ways. So there were 4 interesting flow studies that were run during COVID. They weren't run on flow. They wanted to know who got their ass kicked the most by COVID and who's flourishing now, who's languishing, who's flourishing, what determined it. And they looked at every variable, who made money, who lost money, all that stuff, every health, all that stuff. Turns out there was one variable that mattered. Are you thriving now? Are you flourishing now? How much flow you got during COVID? You cannot fight your biology. If you want to survive and be miserable and continue to have health problems and that downward spiral, live in such a way that you're not getting regular access to flow. Flow often shows up in very dire conditions. In fact, when they did studies in high schools, poor schools, rich schools all over the world, they found that like wealthy white kids get the least amount of flow out of everybody they studied, to just, so it does not correlate the way you think. And it's not a luxury. It's literally how we survive without this shit crushing us.
So let me clarify the relationship between sort of like a fight flight emergency kind of mode, which is sort of how a lot of people seem to be a little bit stuck, or it's in the news, it's in the general atmosphere, it's maybe encouraged by technology. That's the kind of background noise in a lot of the world. And I think it's got more intense over the last few years. Isn't that a barrier to flow? I mean, I could see how it also, if you can be in flow in a war zone, for example, it's an incredible resource, right?
First of all, war produces flow. Fighting produces flow. In fact, you go back to the 50s, most of the work done on flow in the 50s was on soldiers and flow, right? The entire samurai warrior tradition, the Bushido warrior tradition, like every martial tradition in the world is a flow-based tradition. Flow is a tool. It's how we perform at our best. Soldiers in flow, fill the history of combat. So norepinephrine, which is a little bit is anxiety, or a little bit is excitement, a lot is anxiety, can block flow at the anxiety levels, right? I agree with you that we are in a like fight or flight response. Everybody's hyper vigilant, high anxiety. It's a very difficult time. That doesn't mean there aren't a ton of things you can do, as you know, to calm down, right? And you can't perform at your best, react to the challenges you face without doing that. So like, yes, the challenges are real. Life on Earth is incredibly difficult in general, and has been, more so, I think, over the past 3 to 4 years. But I also want, like, the one thing that I sort of think, 55, I've lived through a bunch of times that were this difficult, this crazy. And if you pay any attention historically, right, I'm an American, so like American history, read about what it was, the life was like, during the Vietnam era, where like suddenly for the first time we discovered our country, our government was lying to us. And that was like, as if it was news, right? Over and over and over again. And you just a little bit of historical knowledge, and you're like, oh wow, everybody's sort of lived in interesting times. And suddenly you add a little bit of archaeological knowledge to it, and you don't think like the Egyptian civilization thought they were on top of the world, they're going to rule it forever and not end up buried by sand, or the Babylonians or the Phoenicians, or the, like, take your pick of these great civilizations that we are literally like we have to dig out of sand to find them.
Yeah, the British politicians during COVID would always say unprecedented. And I'd be like, read some fucking history. This been plagues before.
Unprecedented was
first plague.
The first, the bubonic plague. Yeah, exactly. The unprecedented would be the first plague. You're right. You're absolutely correct.
So, what makes one person in a stressful situation, whether it's just background life stress, like in the world right now, or in a very intense war zone, whatever, what makes one person go into sort of just collapse and, some of my Ukrainian colleagues just can't function a lot of days. They're not in flow states. I'm having to support them just to get to function.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
others can go
right. Yeah, they're in like the worst anti-flow situation ever. And I'm not, but by the way, I have friends in the Ukraine as well. And my family who came from there, and like, it is an incredibly uncomfortable situation. An awful situation.
What makes one person go into like an unhelpful stress response, though, and another person?
I mean, I think there's one, it's a fucking war zone. So like, I think there's only so much you can expect of yourself. One, two, the same tools work, right? You have breath work. Is what else are you going to turn to, right? Like, you need to be able to regulate your nervous system to be able to function. And that means you need, what are the best 3 tools for regulating your nervous system in a healthy way? Gratitude practice, mindfulness practice, and regular exercise, right? Those are the 3 best that we know that. There's significant amounts of science. There's reframing tools to reach. I mean, you know what I mean? The list goes on and on and on. Of course, the more stressed out you get, the harder it is to use those tools. And, and that's super true as well. And first of all, some days I think all you can do is survive. I think that is very true. And I don't just think it's true for people in the Ukraine. I think it's true for all of us. Anyway,
right.
There are just some days when all you fucking, look, I don't know, any list of the top 100 experts on human performance in the world is going to have my name on it. And I have a lot of them. Like, I got all the tools at my disposal. I got like the best researchers in the world a phone call away, and I got those days. So you know what I mean? Like, even with that, even fully armed with all the knowledge and all the tools, you know, that's coming for all of us.
Yeah, there are days where nothing works. And I've had people say, hey, you're Mr. Embodiment, you should be able to do something here. And equally, I also know we did a trauma training in Ukraine, and people said, you can't do a training in a war zone. I said, yeah, you just have to do 3 hours of embodiment practice a day so people are regulated enough to learn. You can do the training in a bomb shelter, but we better be meditating and dancing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's totally, it's not, you know, we talk about the peak performance basics as those 3 things. And if you worked for the Flow Research Collective, you worked for me during COVID, you were required to do a daily gratitude practice and daily mindfulness practice and get some exercise, because we're trying to be a peak performance training company, and I need people to be at their best. And like, everybody was terrified, especially at the front end of COVID. We were, you know, financially scared, emotionally scared, physically. I mean, everything was terrifying. You know, people were turning to us for help. And I was like, okay, people, they're turning to us for help. We better stay calm. Like, we gotta figure this shit out.
You gotta be one step up, right?
You know, because if they call you up
as like the flow guy, do you feel a pressure if someone, you know, does a video of you screaming at someone in traffic, or, you know, is there a pressure that you're supposed to be in flow states the whole time?
No, I mean, first of all, I would laugh because like, I'm always the first person to point out that like, I'm pretty bad at a lot of this stuff, which is why I got to become the flow. Right? You start out really behind the curve and you have to train yourself. But yeah, I don't think I've screwed at anything in traffic in like a good 7 months.
Good 7 months. That's
yeah. But 7 months ago, I totally lost my shit and lost my shit. And the guy in front of me got out of his car with a very, very big knife in his hand. Wow. And it was once again a reminder: don't lose your shit in traffic when you live in the middle of fucking nowhere, because you never know who's going to get out of the car in front. I was like, dude, get a control. I was like, oh my God, what? Like, I was so bad at myself. I stuck my head out the window. I was like, dude, I am so sorry. I had a fucking nutty. Get back in your car, go home. I'm so sorry. My bad. It was like,
I'm glad you're still here for the interview. Let's go back to the PTSD stuff then, talking about knife attacks. So PTSD versus flow, I wouldn't have thought they'd be remotely similar. I guess when people
but let me give you the case study that we were looking at.
Yeah.
So exact same situation. You're driving down the street on a motorcycle. Car cuts you off. You swerve. Same result. Both times you manage to swerve around the car and drive off, and you're fine. In one condition, man, you start the swerve, it feels, you react, you start the swerve, it feels great, you drive away, and in flow. That's fairly common. It's common on mountain bikes, it's common when we get cut off in traffic, it's common. Another situation that's also equally common: you swerve, you sort of lose control of the car, you make it around the other car, but it was terrifying, get night sweats and flashbacks, and that's PTSD. And that's equally common. So my question was, well, wait a minute, that's like at best a 1 to 2 second difference, right? Between this is going to become a flow experience and this is going to become PTSD. And I thought personally, in trying to grapple with something as complicated as what the hell is flow and how do you think about it, I was like, oh my God, this is like a 2 second window. So even if I divide it up into like milliseconds, I can still sort of put my head around. And then what I have to figure out is what happens in the brain each millisecond, right? Like, and that's sort of the task that we set ourselves at the collective, and you know, it took a lot of people, a lot of really smart people hammering on that one for a long time to feel like we started to make any progress with it. But that was how we approached it, because that was the question that I was sort of trying to resolve. And you know, as an action sport athlete, as a mountain biker for certain, like I've that line. You can be on both sides of that line on the same run. You know what I mean? Right. You can save your ass. And then 40 feet later, nearly crash.
Like, I've had plenty of both experiences, and there's timelessness in both, there's hyper focus in both. there's engagement, as well as the timeline piece. I guess the critical difference though is powerlessness, right? Like in my experience of flow is being right on the edge of powerlessness and sort of, but still riding that edge. You know, I remember snowboarding, it's literally an edge. Whereas
So
PTSD, it's powerlessness.
I'll tell you one of the things I think we found, it hasn't been the papers and publication. So other people have found similar things along the way, but I don't think that the actual statement I'm going to make has been discovered. And we could be wrong, but this is what we think and are publishing on. So you may or may not know this. It's part of the embodied cognitive story that like every millisecond, every second the brain wants to predict what is going to happen next. And what it really wants to know is how much energy do I need to meet what's about to happen, right? Like that's what the brain is going. And so let me put it in really prosaic terms. You're reaching for a doorknob, right? And your brain is predicting, well, the door's open, so it's going to take this much force to turn the knob and open it, right? Like that's what so you don't shove your arm into the door, and you know what I mean? Like then the brain's always trying to conserve because energy, calories, expensive, right? So when we go to open the door and let's say it's locked, it's not what we expected. The brain produces an error signal. And what really happens is dopamine production gets turned off for a second. And this gets to our attention. You're like, oh shit, it didn't match my prediction, right? Suddenly you're paying attention. Suddenly you're out of your automatic habit. When it goes right, let's say you go to reach for the doorknob and the door is 50 times lighter than you expected and it pops open and there's your best friend that you haven't seen in 5 years, right? Then you get a better than expected predictions, and that gives you a little squirt of dopamine. When you get a better than expected result, you get a very specific brain wave. It's called a P300. It comes out of the parietal lobe, and all it means is better than expected result. It's called a P because it's positive, meaning it happens after the experience occurs, and 300 meaning 300 milliseconds after. So this good thing happens, and 300 milliseconds later, you get this brainwave that means surprise, better than expected results, okay? Trauma is what happens when you're getting worse than expected results and there's nothing you can do about it. That you're exactly correct, that powerlessness. Flow is what the brain at the start of a flow state goes, oh shit, better than expected results. And then you do something else and you get another better than expected results and a third. And if you get like 3 or 4 of those P300 waves in a row, these little spikes of positive surprise, your brain goes, oh wow, dude, you're performing really, really, really well. And it seems to be that one of the things that drops you in. There's a bunch of other stuff that's going on, but that seems to be sort of the passageway right at the cusp. And the difference, right? You can get those negative signals, worse than expected, and that's going to lead you to PTSD, and better than expected leads you towards flow. So
low expectations is the key to life.
You said it. You're absolutely.
It's the joy t-shirt.
Pessimism. I mean, I think Morrissey said it right. I wear black on the outside because I feel black on the inside.
It's nice to see you upbeat. And is there any of the sort of research stuff or the kind of cognitive embodiment stuff, body cognition stuff that we haven't touched upon yet you feel like listeners might enjoy?
I'll tell you the coolest thing we've been working on in the embodied cognitive space. And this is going to be hugely relevant probably for anybody who's involved in any of the dynamic movement practices. This could be dance, this could be action sports, this could be yoga, any of that stuff. So when I ski with the guy I ski with often, we're always playing chase the rabbit, right? So he leads or I lead, and the job is you want to do, he sees a cool feature on the mountain, he throws a trick off that feature. My job is either to throw the same trick he threw or, something similar, something better, just to creatively interpret the feature in the same way, right? It's chase the rabbit game. And it really amplifies learning for a lot of reasons. And if you go all the way back to the inner game of tennis, they talk about, hey, you can learn, we learn better, less through talking, more through watching, right? In the inner game of tennis, he taught tennis by having people watch him hit balls, not talk, And then they would do it, and suddenly they were a lot better at, you know what I mean? So like, we wanted to know, why does that work and how does that work and all that stuff. And one of the things that people don't realize is when you watch somebody perform an action, your mirror neurons run the immediate same program. They run that motor pattern. So you watch your friend do a dance move, your brain runs the same move. That part people may know. What you probably don't know is right after your brain runs that move, you get a go or no go signal. So if you have the move and can execute it, you'll get a little burst of dopamine. You'll get a little reward chemical. If you don't have the move, and meaning you don't do that exactly, do something mellower because you don't exactly have that skills yet, you're going to get a little bit of norepinephrine, a little bit of anxiety, right? And it's just a microsecond. And if you don't have good interoception, if you're not really good at identifying, what signals feel like in your body, you'll never notice, especially in a fast moving, action sports environment. But if you get good at paying attention to it, and it's really cool because you literally are given a go, no go signal by your brain when you see somebody else do a move. And it's incredibly useful in action sports. You're staying out of the hospital for sure. And we've been talking to a bunch of folks in the NBA about, could we use this, for example, to teach players how to dunk, how to spin, how to pass, like to amplify skills acquisition stuff in that context. And we use that idea at the heart of our peak performance aging research, because to amplify learning in older adults, this is one of the things that we relied on, because especially if you're doing dynamic play as older adults, it takes longer to heal when we're older. That's a fact, right? Like that doesn't go away. Like that's true, right? And so you want to get injured a lot less. So you want to play dynamically, but you want to play really safely. So my motto is 1 inch at a time. Like start with an embody, a movement that you can execute 100% of the time with zero fear, and then build on that. And this chase the rabbit game, these go, no go signals are a safe way to do that. Is one of the things that we were thinking about we were doing. Does that make any sense? I haven't tried to explain that out loud before.
I'm sure it will when I listen to it back. And the nice thing about podcasts is listeners can always listen to something twice. It's very dense.
I'm sorry, I haven't really tried to do that.
You give a full 50 minutes worth when we have you on. You get at least twice as much as most people are on. It's good. So yeah. What do you got going on? You've got so many interesting things, like new books, courses, like what if people are like want to check stuff out, like we still got time. So we've got, I've got NAR Country, which is available now. So like bookstores, Amazon, whatever. We've actually got a peak performance aging training that is going to do. We're running the first beta class right now, just to test it, 100 people. Sort of all over the globe. We're going to run another one in October. If you're curious about the peak performance aging training, I guess info at Flow Research Collective would be just telling me you're interested in the next peak performance aging training, but it'll be available to everybody come next February. I think I don't know what else is. That's the big one. There's the big one. All right, let's finish with top 3 tips for embodiment people to get more flow in their life. So like you listening to this, you've got the martial arts teachers, the yoga teachers, the dancers. What will be your top 3 tips for giving them a bit more flow?
And I say this with tremendous fondness. People often ask me this question: what's the 3 things I should do Monday morning? What are the top 3 tips to get into flow? And my answer is always the same: fuck off. There are no top 3 tips. Like, what do you care? And even if I gave you top 3 tips, the problem is, like, there's 3 things to do Monday morning, and then you got to do them Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning and Thursday morning and Friday morning and repeat. So there are 22 flow triggers, right? They're well established. There's probably more on the group flow side that we haven't uncovered yet. That's the toolkit. But which triggers are going to work best for you today on your energy level with your mood, versus tomorrow for somebody, that's totally individual. So that's, I can't give you 3 tips.
Okay, let's do it
for that reason.
So let's say, your worst enemy was on here. You haven't done the work in your 50s of forgiving him, and you wanted to make sure he never got any flow in his life.
Mm.
And just to sort of torture him, you've set up his life. You get to make 3 alterations to remove.
Oh, well, no. I mean, here's the easiest one. I'd give him a cell phone.
Right there.
Give him a smartphone. Like, simple. You want to block flow for the rest of somebody's life? Give him a smartphone. It's perfect.
Just to pause you there before you hit the other 2. For people like myself, it's part of our life. It's part of, my work. What do you do with that? It's crack.
So yeah, honestly, so my friend Catherine Price, who you should have on your podcast, wrote a phenomenal book called Breaking Up with Your Phone. Catherine's a great science journalist, and has sort of, because there wasn't really a world's leading expert on how to break up with your phone, and like, you know what I mean? She ended up becoming one, and she's got tons of tips in that book, tons of free videos. But she points out, and this is totally true, which is hysterical, when they were trying to build smartphones, you know what technology they were looked towards to emulate? Slot machines, the single most addictive technology on earth. Yeah, they want you to keep playing with the device, and her point. I've never been addicted to my phone. I'm not a huge, it's funny for a guy who spent his career writing about technology, I'm not particularly interested in personal technology. I'm a slow adopter. I like to make sure it's not going to make my life any worse before I go near it. And often I use most of the technology begrudgingly. There's certain things I love. I love my computer. I love Microsoft Word. I love, you know what I mean? There's a handful of those things, but I've never, with my cell phone, I've not fallen for it in the way that other people do. But I have certainly seen how gross social media can make you feel and what it can do to you really quickly, right? And I spent years, when you go on a book tour, have you written a book?
Yeah.
So did you go on a book tour?
No, I did a podcast book tour.
Okay. We're same thing. And it lasted a couple months.
Yeah, there was a period about a month or so where I was on a podcast every day or 2.
Okay. So my schedule's a little thicker, right? And I could go do like 3 a day for 3 months on a book tour. But the thing that I know is that, like, if I spend a month or 2 months or 3 months and all I do is talk about myself, my head is so far up my ass on the back end, I can't even see the light of day. You know what I mean? I nearly got divorced on my second book. Like, my wife she was like, you would become an intolerable asshole. And it's all the dopamine high produces mania, basically. And I go out of my way to guard against it. I guard really hard against the highs to sort of avoid that particular one.
So that was 1. Quickly, 2 and 3, ruin someone's life, get rid of their flow.
Oh, I gave him this. Oh, wow, we're still on this. I thought I got you off.
No, I went evil. We're going down the evil route. You've got 4 minutes.
Well, okay, so this is not going to make me many friends, but have children. Get a cell phone, have kids. And let's see, third one would be, this is the single worst thing. Work for a passive aggressive boss who keeps moving the goalposts. Yeah. I tell people, and that's the recipe for burnout. It's an anti-flow recipe. It's also the recipe for burnout. And you can train people out of burnout. You can get people out. We do it all the time. But I tell people, if you've got a boss who's passive aggressive and keeps moving the goalposts, quit now. Because you literally, the only thing you're going to end up with is burnout. And burnout is literally a powerful psychological condition. It's an illness, and it takes a while to get out of, and it's really debilitating. So I'm sort of joking about the kids, but I will, there's a lot of research on it, and kids you have to sort of know, there's interesting research on high flow families and how to do that. A guy named Kevin Rothunde at the University of Utah has done studies on high flow families and how to sort of raise kids in a flow fashion. But if you don't know what you're doing, kids are going to be an ass kicker because they constantly distract you, right? And so either all your flow comes from being with your kids. And that can be I'm fully present playing with my kids. That's very high flow. It's like me playing with my dogs. You know what I mean? Very high flow. But if you're not doing that, it's sort of an anti-flow thing. And there's stuff you can do. But with little kids, there's not a whole lot of stuff. You know what I mean? If you want to be a good dad and you got little kids, welcome to a couple of years of not a whole lot of flow, or a good mom. Like, it's gonna be like, you can get flow with your kids, but like, it's hard otherwise. And all the stuff that makes for high flow families, until they're walking and talking, not a whole lot you can do. So enjoy your sleepless nights, and that'll block flow.
We do need to wrap up, so people can go to Flow Collective, look up your books. I highly recommend them. I said I've listened to some of the audio versions, so it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.